Hello students and welcome to video 3 in chapter 1.5 growth and evolution. So far we've done all of those learning objectives in red, economies and diseconomies of scale, why businesses want to grow. We're now going to look at external growth methods. In this video we're going to look at mergers, acquisitions and takeovers. So just a quick reminder, we did this in video 1, but what's the difference between internal and external growth? Well, internal growth is when a business grows using its own resources. So there's no use of another business. They're going to use retained profit, loan capital, share capital, etc., in order to become bigger. And this is going to be a lot slower because they're going to be using their own resources, if you like. External growth, on the other hand, is when we're going to use another company to help our growth. And therefore, by using another company, we can potentially grow quicker. And so in this graphic here, we've got company X. They're going to be using another company in order to grow. And then we're going to look at 5 or 6 different ways in which we can do external growth. So the first one's going to be mergers, acquisitions, and takeover. So a merger is when 2 firms agree to combine to form one larger business. And basically then the shareholders of company X and company Y become the shareholders of company Z. Well, what does that mean? Well, let's look at this diagram down here. So before the merger, we had 2 companies. We had company X and we had company Y. So what's going to happen is these 2 companies are going to agree to join and become one company. And so that one company is going to be called company Z. Now, in this situation, company X and company Y no longer exist, but all of their resources, all of their employees will then combine to create company Z. So 2 examples, Kraft and Heinz merged in 2015. So what this means is before the merger, Kraft were a company, Heinz were a company, just like X and Y are companies. After the merger, they then formed to create one company called Kraft Heinz. And so Kraft as a company does not exist anymore, Heinz doesn't exist anymore, but together they formed one company. Another example was ExxonMobil in 1998. Now, acquisition is quite similar, but instead, in this situation, instead of the 2 companies merging to become one company basically buys the other company. And so in this situation, we've got X, Y, and X and Y again. So here, company X buys company Y. So company Y is basically then goes under the umbrella of company X, if you like. So company Y ceases to exist and exists under company X. And company X still exists. And that's because company X is the company that's buying the other company. Now, they don't need to buy all of the company. If it's a publicly held company, they just need to buy 51% of the shares, and then they've got something called a controlling interest. So, for example, one company that's grown a lot through buying other companies is Amazon, who's bought Zappos, Twitch, Whole Foods, etc. So then finally, what is a takeover? A takeover is very similar. It's the same as an acquisition. The only difference is when one company buys another company, but that other company doesn't want to be bought. So with an acquisition, company X will go to company Y and say, we want to buy you, here's a price. And company Y may then say, okay, we agree to be bought, and then the acquisition follows. A takeover happens when company X says, we want to buy you, company Y. Company Y says no, and then company says, well, we're going to buy you anyway. We're going to go and buy 51% of the shares. And that's not always possible, but that's basically what a takeover means. So in the context of mergers, acquisitions, and takeovers, we can actually break these up into 3 different types of integration. So first one's called horizontal integration. The word integration is when we combine 2 things together. So horizontal integration is when 2 firms in the same industry at the same stage of production become one firm. And so that could be, for example, where 2 food manufacturers merge. And so, like I said, for example, earlier, Kraft and Heinz are 2 food manufacturers. This is a really good example of horizontal integration. They're both food manufacturers, and they merge together. And so they're in the same industry, which is food, and at the same stage of production because they're both manufacturers. Another example is in 2015, Marriott bought Starwood, and they're both hotels. They're both in the tertiary sector in the hotel industry. Another example, I've just said this one, but Marriott buying Starwood would be another example of horizontal integration. So what are some pros and cons of horizontal integration? Well, one of the main ones is greater market share and dominance. So we look at Kraft Heinz, for example, before the merger, they were both really big companies. But then after the merger, they go from two big companies to one massive company. And so that big company now is going to have bigger market share. It's going to be more dominant in the market. And then that leads on to the third one, which is economies of scale. We saw earlier that by becoming a bigger company, you can benefit from economies of scale. Another benefit here might be being able to enter a new market. So in this situation, Kraft historically have been very good in North America. Heinz have brands all around the world. So Heinz have tended to do better internationally. And so were they two food manufacturers based in the US, for example, then we wouldn't necessarily be entering a new market. But by merging, Kraft was able to access the international markets that Heinz had, and vice versa. Heinz was able to access the markets that Kraft had. So what are some cons? Well, you're going to get some leadership and culture clash. So these two businesses may have had different leadership styles, different culture. And so by combining, you may well get clash in leadership. The second one is regulatory attention. And so whenever two companies in the same industry merge, like Kraft Heinz, then the government's going to have a look at it and say, well, if these two companies combine, are they going to become too big? And this is called monopolistic tendencies. And so with a monopoly, then a business has too much of the market, and then they can kind of exploit consumers, push prices up too much. And so they're going to get attention from the government. And the government in some situations may actually stop the merger because they may say that the two companies are too big. You've also then got the possibility for diseconomies of scale, which we talked about earlier. So the new big company is too big, difficult to coordinate, communication problems, etc. Okay, so the second integration method is called vertical integration. So I'll just move my face back down here. So vertical integration is when a firm integrates with another firm in the same industry but at different stages of production. So again, we're producing the same thing, but we're at a different stage of production. Now, what do we mean by that? Well, one example might be backwards vertical integration. And this is when we integrate with a supplier or a firm who's less advanced in the supply chain. So what do I mean by that? If we look here, we've got a supply chain starting with the raw materials, then we've got manufacturing, distribution to consumers, and then retail. And you can see that this is the beginning of the supply chain, and then when we sell to consumers is the end of the supply chain. So backwards vertical is when we move backwards towards the beginning of the supply chain. So in this situation, one example might be a fruit juice business purchases a fruit farm. So a fruit juice business would be in manufacturing, and they're buying a fruit farm who is raw materials. The opposite would be forwards vertical integration, which you can see as this one, which is when we integrate with a customer who's further along the supply chain. So, for example, a clothing manufacturer might buy a range of clothes shops. And so previously they were just making clothes, but now they can actually sell them to consumers. So what are some pros of vertical integration? Well, with BVI is backwards vertical integration. We can control our own supply chain. So in this situation where the fruit juice business purchases a fruit farm, we're able to control everything up to this point. And so if a fruit juice business buys their fruit from a fruit farm, what about if the fruit farm pushes prices up, for example, or chooses to sell to a competitor? And the fruit juice business, there's nothing they can do about that. Obviously, they can keep on buying at a higher price. But if the fruit juice company sells elsewhere, then they've got a bit of a problem. But if they own their own fruit farm, they're always going to have access to raw materials. They're always going to be able to make their fruit juice because they own the fruit farm as well. So having control over your fruit farm, having control over your supply chain is quite powerful in that situation. With FVI is forwards vertical integration. We're going to have greater knowledge of the market. So, for example, with the clothing manufacturer buying a range of clothes shops, beforehand they were just selling to the shops, and then the shops sold to the customers. And so they're kind of just manufacturing their clothes. They don't have any knowledge of the market because they're not interacting with customers at all. So by having clothes shops, they're able to interact more with customers, maybe follow what's going on more with the fashion news. Obviously, a clothes manufacturer is going to be following fashion, but by having direct access to customers, that can be powerful as well. You're also going to get economies of scale again as you become bigger. So some negatives might be the cost of acquiring business. So the fruit juice business has to buy the fruit farm. You're also possibly going to lose focus on your core business activities. So a fruit juice business, what do? They make fruit juice. And that's what they're experts in. If they buy a fruit farm, they now have to be able to run a fruit farm as well. So they might not have expertise of that. They might not know how to do it. They're probably going to have to hire people to do that for them. So firstly, we don't have any experience of that. And also we might lose focus on running the fruit juice business. And then lastly, potential for diseconomies of scale, again, as the business becomes large. Right, our final one, just move my head again. Our final one is called conglomerate integration. And this is when we integrate with a firm in a totally different industry. So again, this is basically when two firms become one and they're in totally different industries. So for example, an airline might buy a car manufacturer, a chocolate company buys a zoo. And I don't know if that's ever happened, but in theory it could do. And so these are both, all of these businesses are in different industries. So these are examples of conglomerate integration. Now, what you could say here is that a chocolate company buying a zoo, this is totally random. They're in completely different industries. To some extent, airline and car manufacturing, to some extent, they're kind of in similar-ish types of industries. They both produce things which move. They both in the travel industry, you could say. Both of those products use engines, and they're going to be concerned with aerodynamics, but they're still in different industries that it will be conglomerate integration. And then another definition is a conglomerate business. So a conglomerate business is a business that's gone through conglomerate integration a number of times. So they operate in a number of different industries. Now, one good example is Nestle. So you see here, these are the brands owned by Nestle. This is not all of the brands. They own a lot more brands, but this is just some examples. So they have milk products. They have confectionery, so chocolate such as Kit Kat. They have powdered and liquid beverages such as Nescafe. And they also have prepared dishes and cooking aids. So that's basically your packaged food. And so Nestle have moved into lots of different industries. They do specialize in food, obviously. And so what are the pros of conglomerate integration? Well, the main one is that we can spread risk through diversification. So diversification means that we do lots of different things. And so what Nestle could look at here is, well, what about if people stop eating so much chocolate? People think, well, chocolate's bad for you, so let's stop eating chocolate, for example. In that situation, Nestle, obviously it'd be bad for them because they're going to sell less chocolate bars, but they've got lots of other products in different industries that people will hopefully continue buying. So it kind of spreads risk. It's a bit like people say, if you invest in the stock market, don't invest all your money into one share. You want to spread your risk out over lots of shares. Don't put all your eggs in one basket, if you like. We should get access to new customers and markets. So, for example, if an airline did buy a car manufacturer, then they would get access to all of the people that buy cars as well. So it's a way in which we can kind of get more customers, get new markets, especially if the current market we're in is saturated, it's very competitive, and it's very difficult to get bigger. We may want to move into a different industry. And lastly, economies of scale, which we've covered multiple times. Some cons, well, again, the costs, and again, lose focus. So if an airline buys a car manufacturer, then, well, they're specialized in airlines and now they're doing cars. I mean, if their focus is airline, they now have to kind of split their focus between multiple things. And then you've got the potential for diseconomies of scale. Right, a slightly longer video. We've covered a lot of theory in that video. I'll see you in the next one.